Hi historians, today we are doing notes 5 in unit 2. We're talking about Andrew Jackson's democracy or Jacksonian democracy today. So let's get started right away. This is the set of notes that we're going to complete as a class. Okay. So the year is 1828, much like today. There's a hot and just very, very heated and scandalous campaign going on. A pretty divisive campaign for its time. John Quincy Adams was running for re-election. John Quincy Adams, his father had been our second president. We talked to him about him. His father had been a part of the American Revolution and had also been our second president and the father of the U.S. Navy. So his son is now president, and he's running for re-election in 1828, and his opponent is Andrew Jackson. He actually has 3 other opponents. Henry Clay was also running for office as well, and there's another gentleman as well. But those guys are not kind of as, those guys come in 3rd and 4th, and so Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams are kind of hashing it out for the presidency. Okay, let's learn a little bit about Andrew Jackson's background. He was born on the frontier in rural South Carolina. His father died when he was young, and if you know anything about this time period, women weren't really allowed to be landowners. And so, you know, if the father of the family passed away, it left their families in sometimes a pretty desperate situation. So his family is living in poverty. Jackson, as a 13-year-old, joined the South Carolina militia to fight against the British during the Revolutionary War. So, like, by 14 years old, he's a war veteran. Okay, he grows up to become a lawyer and chooses to use his law skills out on the frontier in the territory of Tennessee. Tennessee became a state, and then he served in the Tennessee House of Representatives and the Senate. But here's the deal: Andrew Jackson had quite a few character flaws. He had a very hot temper. He was known for having challenging people to duels if they didn't agree with him. In fact, with one gentleman, he challenged to a duel and shot him with one shot, and the man died. Okay, so he wasn't really very well known, even though he had experience in the House of Representatives and the Senate. He wasn't very well known until he became a war hero from the British, the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, where he led that really impressive victory at the Battle of New Orleans. So we looked at this painting. Okay, this is voters in the presidential election of 1828, and we were taking a peek at different parts of this painting. First of all, we saw that there were a lot of people that had turned out to vote, and many students pointed out that they were all men and that they are all white men, and that would be very much true of voting at the time period. Remember, this is before women get the right to vote and before slavery has been abolished. So African Americans are not allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to vote, so these voters are white men. But what is important to notice is that we kind of have 2 different groups of people. We've got the hoity-toity rich hats here, upper class hats, and we also have a lot of these farmer hats, more like a straw hat that you can kind of see going around. We also saw some things about the how elections took place, that they were not really very private. It wasn't really a private ballot. Like these gentlemen are watching what this guy's doing. They're having conversations potentially about the election right outside where people are voting. So we were noticing these kinds of things about the election. Until the 1820s, the right to vote had been limited to the rich and the upper class. At that point, when we said all men are created equal, we really were talking about men who weren't necessarily born into royalty like the king, and being able to tell the king that at that time was kind of a big deal. But they didn't necessarily think that everybody truly should be able to vote. Really, they wanted it to be the men who were wealthy enough to own property because they were paying the heaviest property taxes, and they were also going to be the ones that were educated enough and could actually read and write, which is kind of important if you're living in that time period. It's not like you're going to be able to see you know, campaign commercials and things like that on television or anything, because there's no such thing. The way to find out about candidates back then is you had to read about them, and you had to read up on their views and things like that. So back into this point, it was the white men who owned property and who were educated that were allowed to vote to choose our country's leaders. And the argument there is that these people have an education, they can read and write and be informed. They're intelligent enough, they own property, they're the ones who are usually job creators, and they're paying the most in taxes. So for the upper class, their argument in being the ones allowed to vote is that we have the most to lose if the country goes in the wrong direction. Okay, so in your notes, would you please write down kind of that philosophy of why the upper class should be the ones allowed to vote. And then we have a new idea that emerges during the 1820s, and Andrew Jackson is going to lead this new idea. Okay, he promises a new kind of government, one that's going to represent common people as well. And so he wanted to be a man of the people, a president to represent the poor, the farmers, and the everyday workers, the working class people. He was representing people from the frontier regions that were becoming new states. Okay, so this is the first time that people who were living in the frontier, that now those territories have become states and they have the opportunity to actually vote in an election like this. He wanted to make sure that they had a voice. So their argument is that citizens should all be able to vote regardless of wealth and education. Now, we notice it doesn't say anything about race or gender. That comes later. So we're taking some baby steps in expanding what it means to have all men are created equal. What does that phrase really mean? And this is one of our first steps in expanding that definition. And we're not just talking about the landowning and educated men of the day. We're also talking about the hardworking farmers and the people who are more, less well off, the poor people, the everyday blue collar workers. Okay, so Andrew Jackson helped form a new political party in this time period. He won, excuse me, his party is for the common people. He called this the Democratic Party, and this is the birth of the Democratic Party that we still see today in politics. Now, we don't have a Republican Party in this time period in 1828 yet. That'll come in about 32 years from this election. Okay, and we'll talk about that in our next unit. But Andrew Jackson becomes the 7th president of the United States, and he's the one who started the Democratic Party. His type of democracy is the idea that the government should be made up of common people, that it should be back to that whole idea of we the people, but not just we the wealthy and elite and upper class people. It's we the common people of the United States having more say and more involvement in what the government is doing. And so this becomes the scene at Andrew Jackson's inauguration. Okay, it was pretty chaotic, people hanging from the ceiling pretty much. Not quite, but it was a pretty rowdy event. March 4th, 1829, over 10,000 people came from all over the country to witness Andrew Jackson's inauguration. Many of them were first-time voters who finally felt that they had a voice, that they had a leader to represent them too, and not just the wealthy and educated upper class. A huge crowd followed the president then after he took the oath of office. They basically followed him and crashed the inauguration party. He's the president of the people, so he just lets the people come right on in, and it ends up turning out to be a pretty rowdy event where there's a chaotic mess of rioting and looting. Now, amazingly, this election was contentious, very much mudslinging, backbiting, bringing up scandals from the past. The new Democratic Party and Andrew Jackson's campaign, basically they were attacking the current president, John Quincy Adams, at the time, saying that he's a Sabbath breaker because he was traveling on a Sunday, which is supposed to be a day of rest back then. They accused him of spending taxpayer dollars to buy a pool table for the White House, and that would be like a gambling piece of furniture, and so that was a little bit scandalous back then. Really, he bought the pool table with his own money, but that's never, the truth is never, people aren't interested in the truth when it comes to mudslinging in politics. But on the other hand, John Quincy Adams and his campaign did a lot of mudslinging about Andrew Jackson as well. They called him hot-tempered, unpredictable, uncouth, and crass. They didn't think he was a very polished politician. He was out from the sticks. He was from the, way up in the mountain region, and they thought that he was just not cut out to be president. He had killed a man in a duel. I mean, that's a little bit scandalous right there. They brought up scandals about Andrew Jackson's wife made all kinds of scandalous accusations about her too. So and the response was, though, one of the things that they did, because a lot of the people who had been out voting, these new voters, not all of them could read and write. So how were they getting information out to these voters? And Jackson's campaign did a really kind of amazing thing. They had, first time there was a campaign song that kind of helped people kind of relate to what Jackson was presenting and his ideas. The song happened to be a song called "The Hunters of Kentucky." They created badges and campaign posters and slogans. They chanted things like "Adams can write, but Jackson can fight," and those kinds of things stuck, and it resonated with the common people. And Jackson ended up getting more electoral college votes and more of the popular vote. However, he didn't have quite enough of the electoral college votes to win. None of the men in the race and in the election actually had won enough to win. So it had to go to the House of Representatives to be decided. And there Jackson did some wheeling and dealing and bargaining with supporters who were going to give their electoral votes to Henry Clay. And Henry Clay was like, well, here, I'll take a cabinet position and I'll give you my electoral votes. And so that's what gets Jackson enough electoral votes to win the presidency. Okay, so there's some scandal there. It's really contentious. Kind of reminds me of a current political situation going on today. So then as a class, we did a little bit of an acted out activity where each team took on a different perspective. Some people were Andrew Jackson supporters, some people were working for his campaign, some groups researched Andrew Jackson himself, others were researching the opposition, the opposing viewpoints, and John Quincy Adams and his campaign. And we did a little bit of an acted out on the day of the inauguration. And so that's where we ended. The other thing that we did was we looked at page 245 in the textbook. We were looking at some of these campaign slogans to see what some of these slogans would look like. So things like Jackson Forever, Hero of Two Wars, the Man of the People, that power should be derived from the people, and using his nickname Old Hickory, which is a really strong type of tree. So that's what we did. We created our own Jackson campaign poster in our notes on page 5, or notes 5, and so that's kind of how we wrapped it up for today. Thank you for participating and joining us today. Hope you get all your notes filled in if you were absent, and we'll see